and welcome to episode 124 of Authors Afterword. On this podcast, I talk to an author about one, occasionally more, of their books in detail. And if you find yourself enjoying today's episode, do share it with your friends. So, I'm Charlie Place, and joining me today is Sophie Jo, author of the YA rom-com Red Flags. 18-year-old Poppy is quick to pull the trigger on a date. She shuts communication down after the first date, after the boy inevitably fails to live up to her expectations. And her expectations are high. She has written out Dream Man list. Meanwhile, fellow sixth former Cam dumps girls fairly quickly. Most recently was Jasmine, who wouldn't entertain the existence of aliens and didn't want to talk about the possibility of God. Cam just wants a deep conversation. Poppy's friends are bored at the rate she goes through boys. They challenge her to last 2 months with the next boy, whatever she thinks of him. And meanwhile, Cam's friend is bored of him always dumping girls. She tells him next time he can't dump the girl, he must wait until he is dumped. So, when Poppy decides to go and sit next to the interestingly dressed boy, who sometimes takes her bus, both teens find themselves in a position of pretend. Hello, Sophie.
Hello. Nice to be here.
It is lovely to have you. Tell us the, I suppose, general inspiration for this book and why you wanted to write it.
Yes, I can. So I think for me, it was really important to tell the story of two very different teenagers who ultimately, despite their differences, have quite a lot in common. So you were saying earlier about Cam with his icks, Poppy with her red flags. They have these really avoidant tendencies, but they also have very sweet hearts, I would say. They mean well. And I think it was really important for me to be able to kind of work out when people are running for the hills because they're getting freaked out in relationships or what have you. Sometimes I think that is coming from a place of maybe anxiety or hurt or self-protection or what have you. So I kind of wanted to delve into that and to consider the fact, I suppose, especially for Poppy, for example, that she has these very high standards, but that actually maybe she needs to peel some of those layers away and be able to embrace vulnerability and mistake making and all of that kind of thing. Whereas Cam, quite similarly, to be fair, but Stephanie, one of Poppy's friends, Stephanie we'll probably talk more a little bit about later on, but she is a character who has some real issues with knowing what she deserves in relationships and what she can accept, what she shouldn't accept. So I feel like although Poppy and Cam are these very different characters, I guess the ultimate sort of crux of the book is working out where the balance is between what you deserve in a relationship. I don't even know how to word it. I suppose just finding that middle ground. So you've got what you deserve, but then you've also got where you can sort of let your guard down and be willing to accept mistakes or disappointments, etc., which we all do and kind of have to do in relationships. So I think that was really important for me in telling that story, especially for teenagers, which obviously is the target age range of this book, is thinking, well, actually, I want to get that across to teenagers that, like, yes, they can have these high standards and I want them to have those high standards. I would not want that to be forgotten. So I'm trying to funnel those healthy relationship messages in, but then also make sure that there's that middle ground of not going so far with protecting yourself that you have this wall up and people are there trying to get it down and you are not willing to let that in. So I think it's quite a hard balance to strike, but I hope that I did. So that's the inspiration behind it.
I think you did it, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. No. I did, I was being modest, but I think I did.
Sophie Jo is amazing, everybody. I'm able to say that because I'm not her. There you go. Well, you mentioned Stephanie. Let's bring her in now. What you're saying here to me is interesting because it sounds that she's even more important to your story, to you, and to what you were trying to achieve and what I think you have achieved, definitely, than maybe I had thought myself. Can you tell us more about, writing her and including her and her story?
Yeah, sure. So I always wanted to have Stephanie in the book. I always wanted to have her as Poppy's friend. And I would say compared to Poppy's other friend, Jordan, Stephanie is very outspoken. She's quite argumentative at times. So she definitely can meet Poppy where Poppy is, but in a different way. So they're often coming at things from different angles. They have different approaches as much as they love each other. So I've always wanted Stephanie there as that character. But then I suppose that it makes her more interesting in a way that she is so assertive and outspoken, but then put her in a romantic relationship and she really struggles to maintain that outspokenness and assertiveness. And I think I realised probably around the point of draft too, that Stephanie's relationship with Kieran could actually be a really good vehicle for driving Poppy's self-growth, because there's a point in the book where Poppy and Stephanie are talking and Poppy realizes that actually Stephanie and Kieran have this relationship where Stephanie is not interested in the same things as Kieran. She doesn't want to go to the gym. She doesn't want to do these kind of exercise classes and stuff in the same way that he does. And Poppy thinks, God, like, actually, Stephanie is in this relationship where she's almost struggling to keep up with this guy and what he wants and what he's about. And he believes maybe that they couldn't make it work long term because they don't have these things in common. And Poppy kind of realizes, like, oh, well, actually, potentially that's what I'm doing too by having these really high standards. Maybe I'm more like this boyfriend of Stephanie's that I've hated this entire time. So yeah, I think she's always been an important character, but it was only kind of, I think, when I really got to that second draft and I was like, okay, it's almost like they've got these parallel stories and Stephanie's got this really well-meaning belief that maybe over time things with Kieran will get easier if she just loves him enough, if she just changes herself enough, maybe their relationship will be like magical forever. And Poppy's kind of there like, no, like I can see that it's not going to be, you just need to improve your standards. And Stephanie's there looking at Poppy's relationships and thinking, you just need to let the door down and let that person in. So it's like they're both right and they're both wrong at the same time, which I think is probably true for a lot of scenarios in life. You know, people have their own views and experiences. And I think, much like we were saying earlier with the general themes of the book, I think often it's about finding that middle ground or just being able to kind of, listen to that other person's perspective and see where they're coming from.
I think we're also very good at giving advice to people and not taking it for ourselves as well.
Everyone can like dish it out, but not take it, I think, a lot of the time. Because I think it's like a self-awareness thing as well, isn't it? And I think, especially because we're talking about teenage characters, as lovely as they are, I obviously have to write them in a way where they're not going to react in the way that maybe 30, 40-year-old adults who've gone through life and had more experiences and been to therapy and what have you, they're not going to react in that way, which is normal because none of us reacted that way as teenagers. So yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to self-awareness and maybe what we are willing to accept about ourselves. Because I think for Cam, for example, he has a realization near the end of the book that maybe he's been protecting himself, protecting his heart because of things that have happened to him in the past. But it kind of needs a conversation with his granddad, who's like a trusted companion of his. He kind of needs that in order to be like, okay, maybe I have been doing X, Y, Z.
You talking about Stephanie, I'm going to go to what you're saying there in a minute. But you saying about Stephanie and me listening to you, is there a sequel in your future maybe with Stephanie in it?
I would love that so much. Whether there is or not, I do not know. But I think in terms of the healthy relationships, like branch of it, I would love that. Because by the end of the book, Stephanie is not with Kieran anymore. Things have changed. And Stephanie puts together this list called The Man That Stephanie Deserves. So Poppy's had this dream man list the whole time. And it's kind of like they've both developed. So Poppy is willing to put her dream man list to one side, but Stephanie is almost leveled up a bit, that she's now at the point where she's not willing to accept the bare minimum. She's not willing to accept somebody that doesn't prioritise her and respect her. So she's now got this list of the man that Stephanie deserves. So I think it would be really nice to see like what happens for her in the future. What does she do? Who does she date? Does she date anybody? You know? I'd really like to see Stephanie go to university, which at this point in the book, I don't think she doesn't really want to do. She wants to stay home with Kieran, get a job. She's more focused on him and his aspirations and his dreams than her own. Just something that Stephanie does that is non-Kieran specific and more focused on herself and her own growth and finding out who she is as a person.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually, because, I mean, we see Stephanie for who she is as a person, but that's because we are able to see her as Poppy sees her, so we're able to see her real person. Yeah. Just thinking of it, that would be quite an interesting book in comparison to You've Already Got Red Flags, and then it'd be quite a different story, I would expect, for Stephanie in a book on her own, in this stage of her life.
I mean, I'll have to pitch it to Scholastic, see what they say.
Well, we'll get on to what you're writing at the end, but we have kind of skipped over Cam and Poppy.
Yeah.
I will ask about them now, actually, and then we'll get on to more of the inspirations and things like that, because I've got another question on there. So can you tell us about creating the characters? And if we say now that we focus on Cam and Poppy, because I know, and it's been wonderful reading your book for this, I found them so real. I realised, no, it wasn't too many chapters in, that I was hearing Cam and Poppy very clearly. I was hearing their voices, which I love. And it just really cemented for me how well you have developed your characters. So, yeah, I just wanted to ask you, can you tell us more about creating them, etc.?
Thank you. That's a big compliment. I found it quite hard to begin with because it's the first book it's my second book that I've ever written. So therefore, it was my first book where I'd done any kind of dual narrative. And I think to begin with, it helped that Poppy has such a clear voice. I guess like the fiercest parts of me is Poppy. And I feel like the way that she words things, I was able to kind of bring that out because I was like, what would I say at my absolute core if I wasn't being filtered? It would probably be this. And then that's what comes out through Poppy. So I've really enjoyed that. And then when I went on to Cam, I was like, well, okay, he's not the same. He's much more introverted. He's much more kind of insular and he's got this guard up against the world. But that said, I wanted him to be quite funny and quite sharp. So to begin with, the way that I wrote Cam was that all his sentences were really short, which was something that just felt more natural for him. And I wasn't sure why, but I went with it. And then over time, I sort of thought, no, I don't think that's working quite so well. There are points in the book where you will realise that the sentences are all quite short, but I definitely extended it. But I would say Cam is a bit drier. I find it quite hard when I'm doing the first draft of a book to almost like have that much of a gauge of who the characters are, because it's like I can picture it, but it's like it's the first time I'm meeting them, so I feel a little bit shy around them. And I'm like, I think they do this, but I don't know. And maybe they'd say this, but I'm not sure. And then by the time I get to the second draft, I'm like, oh, okay, I know them now. And it's like, we're all very kind of chatty with each other by then. And I'm like, well, there's no way she'd say that because she's just done this and he would do this. So it comes, I think, a lot more organically by the second draft. So I feel like that was the point where I was really able to start like sharpening them up. Yeah, and kind of getting them to a point where I felt like they felt real and not like something that had come out of my brain.
With you saying what you are, it definitely sounds like they're real to you, certainly.
Yeah. Weirdly, there was a TikTok that came up for me the other day. My friend sent it to me and she was like, this girl is literally Poppy. That's exactly how I imagine her in my head. And I viewed the video and I was like, same, isn't that strange? And since then I've showed it to like 2 or 3 different people and been like, this is Poppy, isn't it? And they've been like, yeah, that's Poppy. So it is odd because I wouldn't say I'm that good at always visualizing things as I'm reading it. So sometimes someone will say, oh, that person has brown hair, and I'll be like, okay. Like I know it in my brain, but I don't always have a very clear vision of quite what they mean. But yeah, I feel like I got to the point with this where I very much did. Again, I hope that I have created characters that feel like you could know them or you could have been friends with them when you were at school or what have you.
Yeah, I'm definitely missing them since the final page. Yeah, they do sound very, very real. They do come across as such. I would like to ask you about these other inspirations before we move on.
Yeah, sure.
Can you tell us about your work in helping teens know about healthy love?
Yes, I would love to. So I started working with Women's Aid probably about 10 years ago now, because I started to work with a charity called Brooke, which is a UK teenagers' sexual health and wellness and relationships charity. And through that, started to work with Women's Aid, started to write pieces for Women's Aid, and it kind of snowballed from there. And the best way I can describe it is, back in the day, probably would have been 10, sort of 12 years ago, and previous to that, there was not really any kind of supportive guidance, websites, helplines, anything like that for teenagers and young adults who'd been in any kind of abusive relationship. So there would be obviously websites for people who were suffering from domestic abuse, but that was very much focused on people who lived together. It was like the clues in the name, it's domestic, and there was not so much in terms of coercive control, etc., etc. So if you were a teenager who was in any kind of abusive relationship, there was very little support for you. And I think also very little in terms of validating that that was the situation that you were in. It's something that means a lot to me, having been in an unhealthy relationship when I was the teenager, that I want to make sure that teenagers now can Google, one sentence or search something on TikTok or whatever, and like a platter of resources and information come up for them. So I worked on that website with Women's Aid. It was called something like Love Don't Feel Bad, and now it's called Love Respect. So if you Google Love Respect, I think it's loverespect.com now. And yeah, that comes up. And there's all sorts of quizzes you can take. There's fact files. You can find out more about whether your relationship is healthy. If you suspect that it's not, here's what you could do, etc., etc. So I love that. I love that that exists now for people in a way that, like I say, 10 years ago, it just really didn't.
I have to completely agree with you. I mean, just sometimes browsing Reddit or browsing the internet, you can come across posts from very young people nowadays where they're saying this, that and the other, and they're not sure about it. And it can be on various subjects as well. And then you've got people that are able to respond to them, and they're able to do things that you wouldn't have been able to do even just maybe like 5-6 years ago, which is amazing.
Massively.
Yeah,
there's a lot more available. And in fact, actually, I was thinking about this earlier. I feel like it's almost gone from like no information to so much information. And I think that almost feeds back to what we were saying earlier about the red flags and kind of knowing what that middle ground is. Sometimes it could be really hard, I think, now, because there's so much, not even like misinformation necessarily, but just there's just so much. Even now as like a grown adult, I'll be scrolling through TikTok and I think it's like someone on the internet says something with authority and you're like, well, it must be true. So you'll see a video that will say, if he doesn't buy you flowers every week, you're not the one for him and you'll never get married and all these sorts of things. And I'm like, my God, like it's complicated. And I think there's some really good, healthy information out there, like the website that I mentioned, but I think there's also some that can be quite conflicting. And like I say, even if that is something that adults struggle with, I kind of think, well, what if you're 14, 15, 16 in a relationship for the first time? I think that must be really hard now to have that level of information kind of thrust at you all the time.
That is very true. Yes, you still got to do the working out which bit you trust.
Yeah, and kind of trusting your gut. Yeah, I think that's harder to do when you're younger. But ultimately, I think that is what it comes down to, is it's what works for you.
Absolutely, yes. I'm going to ask, it's going to sound out of left field, but here we go, because we're talking about inspiration still. Can you tell us about the cultural influences? For example, I know there's a bit late on in the book, and straight away I was thinking, 10 things I hate about you. Yeah. And then you say it later. I was like, yes, got that right. Yay.
Yeah.
So yeah, can you tell us about the cultural inspirations?
Yeah, there's literally a line, isn't it, where Poppy mentions it. And I was like, is that too on the nose? But I thought, no, I'm keeping it in.
Oh, I was happy with it. Because it was I was there going, is this? And then you said it, I was like, yes.
Yeah, so when we were thinking about kind of comparisons, as I was talking about it with my publishers, we thought it's a little bit 10 Things I Hate About You, and it's a little bit How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. So it's the two 10 themed films, weirdly enough. I wanted it to have a kind of 90s, noughties, teen rom-com energy to it because I just love those films and I think they're really memorable. I don't know, I love rom-coms still nowadays, but I feel like that particular era of rom-com movie really hits hard for me. So I definitely wanted to kind of bring those in. Like I kind of stick to certain shows or whatever that I'm really into. So there's a show that I've loved since I was about 13 called The OC. And it's basically about rich kids in America. And you would expect it as a result to be very vapid and not have much. It's not at all. It's the most like heartfelt, heartwarming show I think I've ever watched. And it's also really funny. But that's about teenagers. And again, they're kind of like sometimes in relationships for the first time, finding their way. And I rewatch that show, I would say at least twice a year. So that is always in the back of my mind when I'm writing. I'm picking up little things and I'm thinking like, oh, maybe there's a sprinkle of that character or whatever. And I also like to rewatch, I don't know if you've ever heard of a show called Girls. It was on HBO about 10 years ago.
Heard of, but yeah, not seen.
It's very millennial. So it was like a bunch of 25-year-old girls in New York. It came out, I think, about 2012 onwards. And I love that. I think the writing in that show, it's so good. It's so well done. And so every time I write, I will rewatch Girls and I will think, what is it about this show that I love so much? Because the writing is so funny. There's not a single line, I think, in that show that is wasted, if you know what I mean. They're all so cleverly done. And yeah, for red flags, there's literally, I thought the other day, there's a lot of pop culture references throughout. And I thought that might be quite a fun social media post, is if I can like drag them all out and be like everything that is mentioned / referenced in red flags.
That would be fun, yeah. Also, it kind of gives you reading and watch lists, which are always nice, you know, the playlists kind of thing. And yeah. Okay, so there was a bit in the book where Poppy takes Cam to the bookshop.
Mm-hmm.
And it was around this time that I started wondering if, you know, you using cultural inspirations, and also, I want to use the word parody. I'm not quite sure if that's the right word, but that's the word that's in my head. In that Poppy talks about liking slow burn sexual tension in her books.
Yeah.
And then she starts describing what I found was effectively your book, which I thought was brilliant, because it seems to me that Poppy is in her own rom-com. Am I barking up the wrong tree here?
Am I so right? Yeah. That was deliberate. So when they go to the bookshop, there is a scene where Poppy is basically thrusting books at Cam to try and get him interested in one of them. They're all romance themed, and she's asking if he wants to read one of these books. And yeah, there is one that she says something like the two characters hate each other to begin with, but eventually she finds out that he's a misunderstood rogue and they find their way. And then, yeah, Cam goes red and they're like, no, that's not the one. So yeah, that was definitely deliberate. And then the book that she ends up giving him, I don't know whether anyone has noticed this, apart from my friend Leah, who noticed it immediately, which meant a lot to me. But the book that she ends up giving him, he talks about it at a later date, and it's Normal People by Sally Rooney. So hopefully at some point someone will read and be like, that's Normal People by Sally Rooney. But we'll see.
I've read the wrong Sally Rooney then. I shouldn't have read Conversations with Friends. I should have read Normal People. Yeah.
Straight on to Normal People. I prefer Normal People.
Fair enough, yeah. No, I was thinking the other day, because so many people on TikTok are reading Normal People, I know. And it's so big, and I thought, yeah, I've got to get back there and read that one. Yeah.
Have you watched the show?
I haven't, no. Again, I am one of those people that generally reads the book before the show.
You've got to go to the book first,
so, yeah, I need to effectively get my arse in gear and read the book.
There's always so much to read, though, and always so much to watch. It's like, where do you begin? But I would recommend it, and both of them, actually, because sometimes the adaptation just doesn't hit as hard, but I think for this one it really does. So both of them I would recommend.
Right, I'm officially putting them on my list then. Okay. At the beginning, you were talking about writing people that have things in common.
Mm-hmm.
And you were also saying about it was important to think about how anxiety makes its way into people's decisions, etc. And yeah, I wanted to kind of come back to that in that, are you able to expand on the importance of having these two people who do have things in common and kind of working it that way?
Yeah, so I don't think it's a vital part of a relationship to have things in common. I don't. And I think, interestingly, that's something that I used to really hold high when I was younger. I used to think that if we like the same music and we like the same movies and everything, then it was like a match made in heaven. Whereas now I'd say I feel very differently. But yeah, I think what Poppy and Cam notice is that even though maybe they don't like the same bands or they don't go and watch the same movies or whatever, actually what they do have in common is a lot of the same values, and at their core, like I say, they're quite similar people. And having stuff in common, you do need things in common, but I think it can come in a mixture of ways rather than just the ways that you might think of when you're 14 and thinking that your dream man has to know all the same songs as you. Like, I think it goes beyond that, and I think that's what they realise over time. It takes a while, but it does sink in.
Well, I like that you have, I think it's Cam that points out, they both like Star Wars, so it's a start anyway, isn't it?
It's a start, and they like Star Wars and they like bowling. And I think those were things that Poppy hadn't thought of, because again, she had this list, and she was like, well, he has to like this, and he has to do this, and he has to go here, and he has to think like this. Cam, for all of his neuroses and anxiety, I think he was able to say, well, actually, hold on, because we both like this and we both like this, which is a really good point. And I think you hit the nail on the head that that's a start. It doesn't have to be everything, but it can be something, and then you can kind of mingle and bond over that.
No, you saying this, it's making me think how, again, times progress, things like that. And yes, interests have always been the big thing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the time people have forgotten about values being important. Can you tell us about, I suppose, including Cam's parents' relationship in your book and the effect of Cam's parents on his romantic relationships and this whole kind of thing?
What I would say with Cam is we know he lives with his granddad. We know that his mom is around, but that something has happened. Cam's granddad says something like, she's not a bad person, she's a good person that something bad happened to. So it's kind of alluded that something has gone down, whether that's a bad experience or she's been in a situation with a group of friends when she was younger and something bad. We don't really know, but we know that Cam's mom is around but emotionally absent is the best way that I would phrase it, and maybe not very good at taking care of herself, therefore not good at taking care of Cam. Cam describes his parents as his mom doesn't want him and his dad doesn't exist. So again, as far as we know, his dad has never been in the picture. An absent dad is always going to be a source of disappointment and insecurity, anxiety, whatever you would want to call it. And I think with Cam's mom, I would say that's probably the more damaging side of it for him. So I think Cam has obviously grown up with his granddad. He's got this strong and sturdy male figure for him that has shown him what it is to be, a compassionate man. But for me, the real kicker would be the fact that his mom is in the vicinity, but she's not. She's around, but she's choosing not to have a relationship with him, or she's got that inconsistency going on that when he was younger, he would have been begging for these scraps of attention, and now there's not really anything there at all. That for me was, I guess, quite important to bring in, because I think Poppy's parents are very different. And to begin with, I thought, well, they come from different scenarios, but maybe they could actually have quite similar parents, and that could be what bonds them. I think it could have got quite bleak quite quickly if we'd had both sets of parents exactly the same as Cam. So what I wanted to do in the end was, if you've got parents who are very switched off and not really there at all, how would it be if Poppy's parents were the opposite and were super switched on, but to the point where sometimes Poppy found it smothering? So I think in a way that's, again, another thing where you would think that's not in common, but it kind of is, because they've both got issues, I suppose, or difficulties with their families.
Yeah, I mean, the whole issue, to use your word, of the parental relationships, particularly in Cam's case, does definitely add another whole new layer to your story. Yeah.
I always like to think about that. Everyone's take on it is very different, but I think for me, I love to delve into why people are they are, and I think it will so many times come back to parents and the way that people were brought up, or over-involvement of parents, under-involvement of parents. And I think that's not so much to blame, but more just to sometimes explain or have an understanding of, actually, well, of course that person is that way because the person that was supposed to take care of them didn't, or whatever. I think it makes so much sense that Cam especially is the way that he is, because for Cam, I think to love very deeply would be a risk. And I think he knows that. He kind of works that out towards the end. And I think he literally says something like, it's a risk, but the risk needs to be taken for some people, which I think it does.
I've just really, really enjoyed how you explored it. There's so many occasions where people are like, oh no, you have to forgive and forget, etc., etc. But you have Cam making a decision at the end that is right for him. Yeah, just the whole way you've done it was really, really good. I liked it. We've spoken about Stephanie. You brought her in. That was been really great and really interesting to find out about that. Can we bring in the others? So we've got Jordan, we've got Williams, I think in particular.
Jordan, interesting, because I was saying earlier that when you're a teenager, you don't always make very good decisions. I feel like Jordan is almost like the voice of reason. Like, Jordan has been to therapy. Jordan has, from what we can see, very healthy, happy, involved, but not overly involved parents. So I would say Jordan is like the person in the middle. Poppy's got this very extreme kind of way of acting. Stephanie's is also kind of extreme in another way. And Jordan's there in the middle, like, I can see it from both sides, but I really think that we need to kind of rein it in and be a little bit less extreme on either side. So I think I really wanted her to be a key part of the story, but without being, I don't know, like two-dimensional, I guess. I really wanted it to be that Jordan was measured and emotionally intelligent, but not a pushover.
Okay.
And I think that came across really well in the end. I think Jordan had a slightly more adult take to the way that she operated, maybe. And I love that also, again, I know we've thrown some spoilers in, but I love that by the end of the book, her and Williams have started to date, because as soon as I put them together at the party, and I didn't plan it, and then as soon as they started talking at the party, I was like, oh my God. So I wanted to bring them together. And I also thought it made so much sense because obviously Stephanie and Kieran have been a thing, Poppy and Cam have been a thing. And then I thought it would be so nice to have Stephanie going out into this new world of the unknown on her own and being really brave and really happy. And then Williams and Jordan are together and Kieran's just like flailing on his own for the first time in his life. So slightly vindictive perhaps, but I liked that side of it.
Fascinating that you didn't see it until the party.
I didn't see it till the party, no.
I thought it was going to happen from early on, actually, so that's interesting.
Williams as well, I forgot to really mention, but I think Williams is, again, a lot more perhaps emotionally intelligent than Cam, as in she can call out Cam on his bullshit and is not afraid to say when she thinks he is behaving ridiculously, which unfortunately, as much as we love Cam, is quite a lot of the time. I really like that as well. I think she's very kind, but she's somebody that's very just to the point, I guess, which I feel like is what Cam needs.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I kind of want to ask about Granddad as well. Can you tell us a bit more about him and including him?
I love Granddad. I wanted there to be that kind of representation because I thought, well, if Cam has this relationship with his family, I don't want the whole focus to be on, you know, the fact that he maybe still lives with a mother that has been abusive or neglectful or whatever. I felt like almost that would become the plot quite easily, especially for a rom-com where I wanted there to be some more serious issues, but I didn't want them to overshadow what we're trying to do at the core, which is the rom and the com. So I think having Grandad stand there was quite a good middle ground because he's able to bring some clarity, I guess, to Cam's family life. So you get to see even the fact that Cam's uncle comes round and you pick up on different parts of their life. But I think also there's a lot of children within this country, for example, who do live with a grandparent. I think it is probably more common than I realised when I was at secondary school. And so I think it's quite nice to have that representation there for those children who have that support from another guardian or the next generation up almost. I love him as a character. He's one of those people where like when I was younger and I'd read interviews with authors and they would say like, oh, that character just like strolled onto the page. And I think, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean? And it doesn't often happen with me, but Grandad Stan really did. So again, when you're saying about voices, when I read it back, I'm like, oh, I can hear his voice. Because I'm from Birmingham, so Grandad Stan, he has like a perfect Brummie accent to me. I can hear the way he talks and the way that he kind of, his inflections and the way that he says things.
Very important character, certainly.
Yeah.
Then. Yeah. So, where might Poppy and Cam end up in the future? I wonder if that was a question to ask.
That's a great question. Well, we know that Poppy wants to do English Lit. We know that Cam is hoping to do an animal behaviour course at some point in the future, but maybe will, maybe won't. So I like to think that Poppy goes to uni, Cam stays at home for another year, gets a job, has a think about what he might like to do, and then I like to think that they keep it going throughout their university careers, make a good go of it. I think they'd find it hard. I don't think it's one of those things where it's like they gallop off into the sunset, because I think, like we were saying earlier, they've both got such, I don't know, kind of complex sides to them. And I guess for two people that are very avoidant and avoidantly attached, I think it's hard when you've got those really deep-rooted coping strategies and defense mechanisms to just completely unlearn those at the get-go. So I like to think at least one, if not both of them, would go to therapy at some point. Maybe there'll be some free therapy at Poppy's University. Get her in there, let's see. But yeah, I think they can do it. And they have a good, solid friendship group around them, which I think also helps, because now they've got mutual friends. I feel like if there was ever any avoidant shenanigans in the future, I know Williams would be straight to offer some advice. So yeah, I think that's the way I can see it going down. What do you think? What could you see?
Well, you know, I'm usually trying to work out a happy ever after, if a happy ever after thing. They're 18, they've got the whole life ahead of them, so I kind of don't want to do that in this case. You know, you
Hard,
kind of want
isn't
to,
it?
it's a long time life, or you hope that life is going to be a very long time, so
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to say, oh yeah, they're going to be together forever and ever. But certainly, I think they've got a very solid foundation for something that is significant.
I agree. And I think even if, I don't know if this is controversial to say, but I agree with what your point earlier was. And I think even if they're not together forever, we've kind of seen that this is a really important relationship for both of them. And sometimes that's kind of all it needs to be. It doesn't need to be that it lasts forever, and if it doesn't, it's a failure. It could just be they're together for 5 years. It's a very important relationship. And yeah, at the end of it, maybe they're not. And that would be horrible and very difficult for them. But it wouldn't have been a waste of time. They've done a lot for each other. So I feel like that would continue. But I don't want to upset anyone. So let's say forever.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I mean, it's that thing where people say, and I've certainly found it to be true, that you can have people in your life for a very short time, but they impact your life.
Or they change its course, or they teach you something about yourself. Yeah. And same with friendships as well. I think there's lots of examples of that where it doesn't necessarily have to be forever for it to be really poignant for you.
Yeah, definitely. So, what has the response been from teen readers?
So, I think generally the response has been good. I'm yet to do any school visits, but I've got some booked in, which is exciting. So it would be nice to actually go and speak to real teenagers, because normally at YA events, for example, if an actual teen is in the room, you're like, oh my God, it's an actual teen, because a lot of the time it will be people in their 20s, 30s, 40s. So I've read some reviews, though, from teen readers, and generally I think the response has been really good. So that has been really lovely to read, because you have to pretend to be a teenager, don't you, when you're writing these books? You literally have to transport yourself back to a previous version, not even of you, but a previous version of someone almost. It's like, I'm a 35-year-old woman, but I'm trying very hard to go back to that time in my life. But it's something I really enjoy doing. If that is being received well and people are reading it and thinking, yeah, that could easily be kids in my year or kids in the year above me or whatever, then that's a really good thing. That's a really positive thing. Often the readers come from school libraries, and so that's always a really lovely thing. So there's quite a few secondary schools near me, so I will always send out a copy of the book to them and just sort of say, hi, I'm a local author, would love it if your teens would read and let me know what they think, because I just think it's good. It's good to know. It's good to know.
Oh, that's an excellent idea. So what's next? What are you writing now?
So I'm writing my third book at the moment. I finished the first draft, so I'm now onto the first batch of structural edits. I don't know how much I'm allowed to say about this because we haven't actually announced it, but it's a rom-com, completely new characters, so nothing to do with Red Flags, but another rom-com. And what I guess I would say is this book is different in the sense that the female lead, she is as far apart from Poppy as you could possibly get. So she's not quite a Stephanie, but I would say not too far from a Stephanie. So we were saying earlier about whether there could be scope in the future for a Stephanie book. I would say if not, this is probably as close as I'll get, because I think this has that element of prioritizing yourself and not leaning into somebody else in a relationship so much that you forget yourself. So I'm finding it really fun to write. I'm finding it probably a little bit harder to write, I think, than Red Flags, because obviously Poppy has such a strong personality that I think that brings a lot of the humour in Red Flags. Whereas with this one, because this character has more of almost like a quietness to her.
This is one person narrative then, effectively.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, all about this person.
Okay. Sophie, it has been lovely having you today. And yeah, I've enjoyed every moment of reading your book. I flew through. It was great. Thank you for coming here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I do hope you enjoyed this episode. Do join me next time. And if you have a moment to spare, please do leave a rating and/or review of this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Podcast Addict. Thank you. Authors Afterword, episode 124, was recorded on the 17th of March and published on the 14th of July, 2025. Music and production by Charlie Place.